My name is Delilah Cooper. I'm 44 years old, a civil engineer, divorced, and raising two children on my own in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona. People like to call me strong. I think that's just another way of saying I learned how to swallow things that hurt. The story I'm about to tell started on a Thursday evening in early January. Dinner dishes were stacked in the sink. The house smelled like tomato sauce and garlic, and my kids were in the living room. Caleb on the couch, pretending not to watch cartoons. Rosie at the coffee table, coloring with her tongue stuck out in concentration. My phone rang. Mom flashed on the screen. I answered without thinking. That was my first mistake. Delilah, my mother Vivian said brightly, not even pausing for a greeting. I'm planning my 70th birthday party. It's going to be big. The tennis club, the charity board, some of your father's old real estate partners. I want it perfect. I leaned against the counter, listening, humming at the right moments. I'd learned long ago how to survive my mother. Nod, agree, don't interrupt. Then she mentioned my children. Caleb must come, she said cheerfully. He's grown up now, knows how to behave. I want to show off my grandson. I waited. My heart already knew what was coming. There was a pause, a careful one. But Rosie, Vivian continued, her voice lowering just slightly, you should leave her at home. I laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. What? She won't be comfortable with that many people, my mother said quickly. And honestly, Delilah, I don't want to have to explain her to the guests. This is an important day. Explain her. Like my daughter was a stain on the tablecloth. My chest tightened, but I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I did what I'd always done. I stayed quiet. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Rosie looked up at me, smiling, and ran over with her drawing. Mommy, look, she said proudly. It was a birthday card. Wobbly letters, stick figures holding hands, Grandma and Grandpa smiling in a sunflower garden. Something inside me cracked. Later that night, after Rosie was asleep, I sat across from Caleb at the kitchen table and told him everything. He didn't interrupt, didn't react. Then he looked at me and said calmly, we should go, and we should bring Rosie. I started to argue, but he continued, if we don't, they'll keep deciding who belongs in this family. And Mom, I saw something once, at Grandma's house, an old photo. There was a man who looked like Rosie. My blood ran cold. That night, buried memories surfaced, things I'd promised never to dig up. The next morning, Rosie asked if she could wear her pink dress to Grandma's party. I said yes, and just like that, the silence ended. The afternoon of my mother's birthday party, I sat in the driver's seat for a full 30 seconds before I turned the key. The house I'd grown up in, Scottsdale, manicured lawns, clean white stucco, the kind of neighborhood where people waved but didn't really see you. Waited at the end of the drive like a memory that had never forgiven me for leaving. In the back seat, Rosie hummed to herself, clutching her card like it was made of gold. She wore her favorite pink dress, the one with tiny embroidered flowers at the hem. Her hair was brushed back with 2 clips, one butterfly, one star, because she insisted Grandma would like fancy hair. Caleb sat beside her, tall and rigid, hands folded in his lap. He looked out the window, jaw clenched so tight I worried he'd grind his teeth down to nothing. Mom, he said, voice low, if they say something, don't stop me. I tightened my grip on the wheel. Caleb, I'm not going to yell, he cut in. I'm just not going to let them erase her. I swallowed hard. Okay. Rosie leaned forward between the front seats. Mommy, will Grandma like my card? I forced a smile so bright it felt like it might crack my face. She'll love it, sweetie. But my stomach churned as we pulled up to the gate. My mother had outdone herself. The backyard looked like it belonged on a wedding brochure. White lanterns hung from trees, fresh flowers arranged on every table, crisp white cloths, waiters in black vests moving through clusters of guests holding champagne flutes. There were at least 60 people, laughter, clinking glasses, a soundtrack of polite wealth. And we were about to walk in like a storm with a name. As soon as we stepped through the gate, my mother Vivian, elegant in a teal dress, jewelry sparkling, hair curled like she'd been styled by an army of professionals, turned toward us mid-laugh. Her smile froze. Not gradually, not politely. It just stopped. Her eyes snapped to Rosie, then to me, then back to Rosie again, like she was trying to convince herself she was hallucinating. She moved fast, crossing the yard with that controlled fury only women like my mother could pull off. She grabbed my forearm, tight enough to hurt, and pulled me toward a corner near the garden wall. Her voice was sweet, but her teeth were practically grinding through the words. What are you doing? I looked down at her hand on my arm. Calmly, I peeled her fingers away one by one. My daughter is here, I said evenly. Vivian's eyes flashed. Delilah, I told you. And I heard you. My voice stayed level, but something darker pressed behind it. Rosie is your granddaughter. I don't need permission to bring my child. My mother's nostrils flared. This is my birthday. This is important. Do you understand what people will say? They'll say you have a granddaughter, I replied. For a second, Vivian looked like she might slap me. Then she noticed the guests glancing over. In an instant, her expression snapped back into place like a mask. She turned with a brittle laugh and waved at someone from the tennis club as if nothing was wrong. That was my mother's gift, burning down inside while smiling in public. I turned and found my father. Howard stood near the drinks table, shoulders squared, posture stiff, like he was bracing for impact. When his eyes landed on Rosie, his face darkened, something like dread, like anger, like shame. He walked over fast. His voice was low, shaking. Take her home, now. My whole body went cold, but I met his gaze. No. Howard's mouth tightened. Delilah, my daughter's name is Rosie, I said, every syllable deliberate, and I'm not taking my daughter anywhere. For a long moment, we stared at each other, father and daughter, the air between us tight as a wire. Then Howard turned away without another word. But as he walked, I saw his shoulders trembling. Not rage. Something else. Rosie, oblivious to the war happening around her, ran toward a group of kids playing near the patio. One little girl complimented her dress, and Rosie giggled like she'd been given a crown. Some guests approached me politely. Oh, she's adorable, a woman said, smiling warmly. How old is she? 8, I replied. A man asked, is she enjoying school? They were curious, not cruel, not uncomfortable. But the relatives were different. My sister Pauline's kids, Chloe and Brendan, stared from behind their mother's legs like Rosie was an animal they didn't understand. Aunt Felicity's son Oliver glanced at Rosie and then quickly looked away, as if eye contact was dangerous. Vivian floated through the party like a queen, but every time someone asked about Rosie, my mother redirected with a laugh and a quick change of subject. She didn't want to explain her. Or worse, she didn't want to admit Rosie existed. Caleb didn't leave Rosie's side for long. He leaned against an old oak tree, hands in his pockets, watching the adults like he was studying their weak points. I kept trying to breathe through the tension. For an hour, everything held. Then the MC stepped onto the patio with a microphone and clapped for attention. All right, everyone, he announced. It's time for gift giving and the big family photo. My pulse spiked. Caleb straightened beside the tree. Vivian took the microphone, her smile dazzling. I want my dear grandkids to come up here with me, she said brightly. Chloe, Brendan, Oliver, Mia, and Caleb too. Come up here with Grandma. 5 names, and not one of them was Rosie. Rosie's head snapped up. She looked around, confused, still clutching her card. Mommy, she whispered, Grandma didn't say me. I felt like I'd been punched. My throat tightened so fast it almost stole my breath. Caleb didn't move for a few seconds. His face went still, cold. Then, without a word, he reached down and took Rosie's hand. Rosie looked up at him, blinking. Caleb? Caleb squeezed her fingers gently, and then he walked, straight toward the stage. Rosie stumbled at first, surprised, then followed, clutching her card like a shield. The yard shifted. People noticed, heads turned, conversations dropped into murmurs. Vivian saw them coming. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Then she forced it back on, bending toward Caleb as they reached the steps. Caleb, she murmured sweetly, but her eyes were sharp. Let Grandma take a picture with you first. Rosie can do one later, okay? Just... No! Caleb's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through her like a blade. Vivian blinked, still smiling. Honey, don't make this difficult. Caleb stepped up onto the stage fully, pulling Rosie up with him. He turned to face the crowd. No, he repeated, louder now. If my sister can't be in the picture, I won't be either. The air seemed to stop moving. Vivian's smile twitched, like it might crack. Howard started pushing through the guests toward the stage. Vivian lowered her voice, still smiling for the audience. Caleb, don't embarrass Grandma in front of everyone. Caleb looked directly into her eyes. Then he turned back to the crowd and lifted his chin. I think everyone here should know something, he said, voice steady. A ripple of whispers swept through the yard. Howard reached the stage, his face draining of color. Caleb, he warned under his breath, grabbing his shoulder. That's enough. But Caleb didn't flinch. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. Howard's grip tightened. Put that down. Caleb's eyes didn't leave the screen as he scrolled. Then he spoke, loud and clear, reading the words my mother had said like a sentence being delivered in court. 2 weeks ago, Caleb announced. Grandma called my mom. She invited me to this party. but she told my mom not to bring my sister Rosie. The murmurs grew louder, surprised, confused, scandal-hungry. Howard reached for the phone. Caleb stepped back and kept reading. Rosie, you should leave her at home. Vivian's face went pale. Howard lunged to cover Caleb's mouth. But Caleb jerked away, raised his voice even higher, and finished the line that shattered the party. I don't want to have to explain her to the guests. A sound went through the crowd, like someone dropped glass. Vivian's hand trembled so badly the microphone slipped. It hit the stage floor with a dull thud and rolled toward Rosie's feet. Rosie stared at her grandmother, wide-eyed, confused, then held up her card with both hands and offered it like she was offering her whole heart. Grandma, Rosie said clearly, sweetly, I made you a card. I drew our whole family. You and Grandpa and Mommy and Caleb and me too. The yard went silent. So silent I could hear my own heartbeat. And something inside me, something I'd swallowed for 8 years, finally started to boil. Because in that moment, watching my daughter offer love to the woman who rejected her, I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I don't remember deciding to step onto the stage. I just remember looking down and realizing my feet had already moved. 60 faces stared back at me, some shocked, some uncomfortable, some openly horrified. My mother stood frozen beside Caleb, her lips parted, her carefully constructed world trembling at the edges. My father's hands were still raised in the air, as if he'd been caught in the middle of committing a crime. Rosie stood between them, holding her card, eyes bright and trusting. I bent down, picked up the microphone that had rolled to her feet, and straightened. My voice came out steady. My mother said she didn't want to have to explain my daughter to the guests, I said. Vivian lunged toward me, panic cracking through her composure. Delilah, don't. This isn't the time. I stepped away from her grasp. So let me explain, I continued, lifting the microphone slightly, to her and to everyone here. The crowd went deathly still. For 8 years, I said, my parents have treated their own granddaughter like something that needed to be hidden. A ripple moved through the guests. Caleb tightened his grip on Rosie's hand. Rosie leaned slightly against him, unaware she was standing at the center of a truth bomb. Every Christmas, I continued, my voice beginning to shake despite my efforts. The other grandkids opened their presents in front of the whole family. Rosie was handed an envelope after everyone left. Murmurs spread. Every family dinner, Rosie was seated at a small table in the kitchen while the others sat together. The excuse was always the same. She eats messily. Convenient. Convenient for whom? I turned slightly, my gaze locking on my father. Howard's face had gone gray. Last year, I said, on Rosie's 7th birthday, she asked me why Grandma and Grandpa didn't come. Do you know what I told her? My throat tightened. I swallowed. I lied. I said they were busy. A bitter laugh came from somewhere in the crowd. The truth, I continued, they were at my sister Pauline's house, celebrating her cat's birthday. Gasps. A few people shook their heads. Someone muttered, that's unbelievable. I took a breath that felt like it scraped my lungs. But that's not the worst part. The words hung heavy. 8 years ago, I said slowly, when Rosie was born and diagnosed with Down syndrome, the doctor told me something. I turned fully toward my father. Her condition isn't random, I said. It's inherited. Howard's eyes dropped to the ground. That gene, I continued, comes from my father's side. A stunned silence crashed down over the yard. I heard my sister Felicity's chair scrape back as she stood. What are you saying? I didn't look away from Howard. Dad, I asked quietly into the microphone, that gene came from your family, didn't it? Howard didn't answer. His shoulders began to shake. I turned back to the crowd, my voice thick but resolute. My father had a younger brother. His name was Wallace. A collective intake of breath rippled through the guests. He had Down syndrome, just like my daughter. Felicity gasped. A brother? Mom? Dad? Is that true? Vivian's face crumpled, fury and fear tangling together. Wallace was sent to a nursing home when he was 12, I continued, right after my grandparents died. My father was 22. He signed the papers himself. Howard made a strangled sound. After that, I said, Wallace disappeared from our family. No photos, no stories, no name. The silence was unbearable. He died alone in that home in 2008, I finished. Not one person from this family went to see him, not even my father. Howard's knees buckled. He grabbed the edge of the stage to stay upright, sobbing openly now, raw, exposed, stripped of dignity, in front of everyone he'd tried to impress. I kept this secret for 8 years, I said, my voice breaking at last, because my father begged me to. He said it was the family's shame, that digging it up would destroy us. I laughed softly, humorless. But today, I continued, when my parents tried to hide my daughter the same way they hid Wallace 50 years ago, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Vivian screamed, the sound sharp and unhinged. You ruined my birthday, she shouted. Are you happy now? I looked at her, really looked at her. No, Mom, I said calmly. You ruined it when you decided your own granddaughter wasn't worthy of being here. The crowd broke. People began to leave in clusters, some shaking their heads, some whispering urgently, others refusing to meet Vivian's eyes. The perfect party collapsed in minutes, like a soap bubble touched by truth. Felicity rushed toward me, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know, she sobbed. Why didn't anyone tell me about Wallace? I didn't answer. Rosie tugged on my sleeve. Mommy, she asked softly, confused by the chaos, why is everyone crying? Why won't Grandma take my card? My throat closed completely. I stepped down from the stage, wrapped my arms around both my children, and guided them toward the exit. I didn't look back. Behind us, the world my parents built on silence finally crumbled. And I knew, deep down, that some things, once broken, can never be put back together the same way. The fallout didn't wait for morning. By the time we got home that night, my phone was already vibrating with missed calls and unread messages. I didn't open them. I tucked my kids into bed, sat on the edge of Rosie's mattress while she lined up her crayons just right, and listened to Caleb pace the hallway like a guard on duty. Mom, he asked quietly later, sitting beside me on the couch, do you think I did something wrong? I pulled him into my arms. You did what it took me 8 years to do, I said. You told the truth. That seemed to be enough for him, for the moment. The next few days were brutal. My mother Vivian called constantly. Sometimes she screamed. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she did both in the same breath. She told me I'd destroyed the family, humiliated her in front of everyone she respected, turned her friends against her. I didn't argue. I told her one thing, over and over. I didn't destroy anything. I stopped hiding. My father, Howard, said nothing. Not a call, not a text, not even a message through someone else. His silence weighed more than my mother's rage. Pauline called on Tuesday. She didn't bother with greetings. Do you have any idea what you've done? She shouted. Mom's tennis club won't stop talking. People are looking at her like she's some kind of monster. I waited for her to finish. Then I asked quietly, what about Rosie? Pauline went silent. What about Mom and Dad refusing to invite their own granddaughter? I pressed. Is that not a problem to you? There was a pause, then the line went dead. Felicity was different. She called 2 days later, and the moment I answered, she broke down sobbing. She said she couldn't stop thinking about Wallace, about how many times she'd walked past that locked garage storage room without ever asking what was inside, about how easily she'd accepted the version of the family she'd been given. I feel like I failed her, she cried. I failed Rosie. Life slowly settled into something quieter. We stopped going to my parents' house on weekends. Instead, we went to Papago Park, to the community pool, to the library where Rosie liked to sit on the floor and read picture books out loud. Caleb changed in ways I didn't expect. He spent more time with Rosie, teaching her card games, reading to her every night, patiently letting her correct him when she got the rules wrong. It was like something had awakened in him, a protectiveness that wasn't heavy or angry, just steady. Sometimes Rosie asked questions. Mommy, she'd say, is Grandma mad at me? I'd kneel down to her eye level and answer honestly. Grandma needs time to think. This isn't your fault. Rosie would nod and run off, satisfied. Kids accept truths adults twist themselves into knots to avoid. For 4 months, life felt almost peaceful. And then, at 2:07 a.m., my phone rang. I knew before I answered. Delilah, my mother said, her voice thin and trembling. Your dad had a stroke. You need to come to the hospital. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. Howard lay in the bed, the right side of his body slack, the corner of his mouth drooping. Machines beeped softly around him. He looked smaller, fragile, like a man who'd finally run out of places to hide. Vivian sat in the hallway, not coming in. Her face was hollow, eyes rimmed red. When I passed her, she didn't yell. She just looked tired. I sat beside my father's bed. For a long time, we didn't speak. Then Howard broke the silence, his words slow, heavy. Do you hate me? I exhaled. I don't hate you, Dad. I'm disappointed. He stared at the ceiling. Then, piece by piece, he finally told me everything. About Wallace. About the brother he loved most. The boy who laughed too loud, hugged too hard, followed him everywhere like a shadow. About 1967, when their parents died, and 22-year-old Howard was left with a 12-year-old brother who needed more than he knew how to give. About the relatives who told him sending Wallace away would be best for everyone. About signing the papers. About visiting less and less, because each visit hurt too much. About the phone call in 2008. About never forgiving himself. Tears slid down his temples and soaked into the pillow. I saw Wallace every time I looked at Rosie, he whispered, and I was afraid, so I chose distance. He turned his head toward me, eyes glassy and pleading. Please, he said, let me see Rosie. Let me apologize before it's too late. I stood slowly. I'll ask her, I said. The decision is hers. That evening, Rosie sat at her desk coloring. I knelt beside her. Sweetheart, Grandpa is sick. Do you want to visit him? She paused, blue crayon hovering in the air. Is Grandpa still mad at me? She asked. My heart clenched. He wants to see you, I said carefully. He wants to talk to you. Rosie thought for a moment. Then she nodded. Okay, I still have the card I didn't give Grandma. Can I give it to Grandpa first? I hugged her so tightly she squeaked. The next day we went to the hospital together. Caleb held Rosie's hand the whole way. Howard's eyes filled with tears when he saw them enter. Rosie walked right up to the bed and held out the card. I made this for Grandma, she said proudly. But you're in it too. Look. Howard stared at the drawing and stopped at one corner. Who is this? He asked, voice breaking. Rosie pointed. I saw him in the old photo box in the garage. He looks like me. I think he's family. Howard sobbed. That's Wallace, he whispered. Rosie thought for a second. Then she patted his hand gently. Then don't forget me, she said. Remember me while I'm still here. Howard wrapped his arms around her and cried like a man who'd finally been allowed to grieve. Behind me I heard footsteps. Vivian stood in the doorway, eyes wet, watching everything she'd nearly lost. Caleb turned toward her. She swallowed hard. I'm sorry, Vivian said softly. I was wrong. Caleb hesitated. Then he stepped forward and hugged her. And for the first time in 50 years, the silence finally broke. For a long time, none of us moved. Howard was still holding Rosie, his shoulders shaking as if the weight of 5 decades had finally found a place to land. Rosie, small and steady, patted his back the way I used to pat hers when nightmares woke her up in the middle of the night. It's okay, she told him softly. You were sick. Sick people forget sometimes. I forgive you. Howard broke completely at that. Not the quiet crying of a proud man trying to save face, but the kind of sobbing that emptied him out. The kind that left nothing hidden. Caleb stood beside the bed, gripping his sister's hand, his eyes red, his jaw clenched the way it always was when he was trying not to cry. For months, he'd carried himself like armor was the only thing keeping our family upright. Watching him then, I realized something painful and beautiful at the same time. He was still just a kid who wanted his grandparents to love his sister, a kid who wanted an apology badly enough to wait for it. Vivian took a step into the room, hesitant, like she was afraid the floor might collapse under her feet. Caleb, she said quietly. My son looked at her. He didn't answer right away. Vivian swallowed, tears spilling freely now. I was wrong, she said again. I let fear make me cruel. Caleb stared at her for a long second. Then he stepped forward and hugged her. Not tightly, not dramatically, just enough. I felt my knees weaken. Over the next few weeks, things didn't magically fix themselves. But they shifted. The truth was out. There was no putting it back in the box. Word of the party spread fast through Scottsdale, the tennis club, the charity board. Friends who used to smile politely now avoided my mother, or reached out with uncomfortable honesty. Some apologized. Some admitted they'd noticed things but never said anything. Honesty, it turned out, was contagious. Pauline called again. This time she didn't yell. She cried. She said her kids kept asking why Rosie hadn't come over to play lately, why they couldn't see their cousin. That's when it hit me, she said quietly. It was never the kids who had a problem. It was us. Felicity cried when she saw Rosie again, hugging her like she was afraid to let go. A week later, all of us gathered at the hospital. No white lanterns, no tablecloths, no pretending. Rosie climbed onto Howard's bed, holding the drawing high, the one with Wallace included. The other kids climbed up too, laughing, arguing over who got to sit closest. Caleb stood beside Vivian, one hand resting on her shoulder, steady. Howard looked at all of them with eyes brighter than I'd ever seen. That picture, taken on a phone in a quiet hospital room, was the most perfect family photo we'd ever had. After 2 months, Howard came home in a wheelchair, his right side still paralyzed, but his spirit had changed. The first thing he asked Vivian to do was go into the garage, find Wallace's photo, and hang it in the living room. Let him come home, he said. Vivian later posted the hospital picture online with a long message about Rosie, about Wallace, about the mistakes that nearly cost her everything. Something surprising happened. People didn't turn away. They leaned in. Now every Sunday we go over for lunch. Rosie teaches Grandpa how to play chess, even though she gets the rules wrong every time. Howard listens patiently, smiling like every mistake is a gift. Caleb is 16 now. He talks about becoming a lawyer, about protecting people who don't always get to protect themselves. As for me, I learned something I wish I'd learned sooner. Silence doesn't keep the peace. It only teaches children who is allowed to belong. If you're in a situation like mine, don't wait as long as I did, because the ones who pay the price for our silence are always the ones with the smallest voices.